Hello, everybody. Welcome back to 50 Shades of Tay. I'm your host, Taylor Gonzalez, and today I am joined by a very special guest. He's an author, he's a producer, he's the director of one of my favorite movies, Elvira's Haunted Hills. Sam Irvin, how are you doing today?
Great. So glad to be here, Taylor. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate this. This is such a cool opportunity to meet you and to do this interview with you. Very
I love
exciting.
it. I love it.
I wanted to start off by asking you about your new book. You have a new book that just came out called The Epic Saga Behind Frankenstein, The True Story. What can you tell me about this book? Oh, there it is.
Ta-da. I'm
Awesome.
all ready to promote. Yes, this is what you would call a major obsession. It's 400 pages, all color pages,
Mm.
some black and white photos, of course, but everything, all the pages themselves are in color. And it's 1,350 photos, and it's all about the making of Frankenstein: The True Story, which was a two-part NBC um, adaptation of Frankenstein that aired in 1973. So when this book came out toward the end of last year, it was the 50th anniversary exactly because the movie premiered in November of 73. And so it's a celebration of the film. When I saw it at age 17 in 1973, it completely blew me away. It was an all-star cast. Uh, uh, James Mason, Leonard Whiting from Romeo and Juliet plays Dr. Frankenstein. Michael Sarrazin plays the creature who comes out looking beautiful at first. This was an innovation of the screenwriters, um, Christopher Isherwood and Don Bacardi, who were gay, and they put a lot of gay subtext into this. And they have this beautiful Romeo, Dr. Frankenstein, who brings to life a beautiful creature. And only after a while does his skin start to deteriorate, and that's when the doctor sort of abandons him. But up until that point, they've had this very, very um, it's subtextual, but it's definitely a relationship going on. I mean, he even takes him on a date to the opera. I mean, how more gay can you get? um, and it also has Jane Seymour as the female creature. It has Agnes Moorehead, Sir Ralph Richardson, Sir John Gielgud, David McCallum. I mean, it's just the most incredible cast. And it was this major, the most expensive television production up to that time, the most expensive horror movie of theatrical or TV up to that time. And it's just a film that absolutely blew me away. Partly because of the gay subtext, because I was a closeted gay kid trying to figure things out, and this all the subtext in this just screamed out at me, and I'm like, was this intentional or am I just reading things into it? And I wanted to know. And back in those days, I did a horror fanzine called Bizarre, and I bamboozled my parents into sending me to London as a high school graduation present. And I started interviewing all my horror icons and idols, from Peter Cushing and Vincent Price and Christopher Lee and all of those people, but also people who were involved in this production, like Jane Seymour. I mean, I took her out to dinner and interviewed her about this movie way back then, and I put it on the cover of my fanzine. And then the obsession just started. And I started corresponding with the producer, Hans Stromberg Jr., who was gay. Found out that all of the gay people involved in the production were sneaking in as much gay subtext as they possibly could to get by the censors. And they called themselves the Lavender Hill Mob. And I'm like, oh my God, this is a book. This has to be completely uncovered and revealed. And so that's what I've done. And so it evolved. I mean, I could go on forever. I mean, I did a magazine, another magazine 40 years later, Little Shop of Horrors. The whole magazine was devoted to the film, and I won an award for it. And then that led to Shout Factory doing the restoration Blu-ray, and I did all the extras for the Blu-ray and won another Rondo Award for my audio commentary. But all of that was just appetizers leading up to this massive coffin table book on this movie, and I'm so proud of it. I got Anne before she died. I got Anne Rice to write the foreword for this, and it was the. I mean, as you know, she wrote Interview with the Vampire. Well, this was the movie that inspired her to write Interview with the Vampire, that completely launched her whole career, and she owes everything to this film. Then I got Guillermo del Toro to write the afterword, He is also a huge, massive fan of this movie, which has inspired so much of his things of his films, including Shape of Water. He even credited this movie as one of the many inspirations for that. But guess what Guillermo is doing right this very second as we're speaking? He is in
Oh
Ireland
yeah.
directing his own version of Frankenstein.
Yeah, I
So
cannot wait for that.
anyway, there couldn't be a better person to write the afterword to this book.
Yeah.
And I have a billion interviews in here of people involved in the film. David McCallum before he passed away just this past fall, and Jane Seymour again. I interviewed her a couple more times for the Blu-ray on camera, and again for this. And Leonard Whiting. Oh my God, I hosted the 50th anniversary screening of this movie in London just a
Oh.
couple months ago in November, the very month that it aired 50
Mhm.
years ago, with Leonard Whiting there for a Q&A that I did with him.
Oh,
I mean, it
that's
was
awesome.
incredible. So, yeah, don't get me started, but I'm so proud of this. And it's available on Amazon worldwide in hardback, paperback,
Mhm.
ebook. And guess what?
Mhm.
I am just putting the final touches on the audiobook version
Oh,
that's
awesome.
coming out this month. We're taping this in February of 2024,
Mhm.
and it's coming out just later this month. We've already finished recording it. I'm just proof listening to it, and then it goes to Audible for its QC, um, you know, breakdown and make sure that everything is in perfect order. But hopefully, by the middle to end of February, it'll be out. And it
That's so
has,
cool.
I narrate it, but also I've got all these guest stars, like Jane Seymour voices the interview with her. Same with Leonard Whiting, with Don Bacardi, who was the
Mhm.
co-screenwriter. And then for people who have passed away, I got my friends Juliet Mills and Maxwell Caulfield to voice some of their interviews, and it's amazing.
That's so
And
cool.
of course, Guillermo was a little busy in Ireland doing Frankenstein, so I got his pal Doug Jones, who
Ooh,
played
cool.
Amphibian Man in The Shape of Water and was in Pan's Labyrinth and a whole bunch of Guillermo's films. He reads his afterword, and Juliet Mills very graciously reads Anne Rice's forward. And so anyway, I'm hugely proud of the audiobook too, which is pretty cool. But you need both. You can
Yes.
hear us all tell you the story, but you're going to need the 1,350 photos that are in this book.
That's incredible. That is so awesome. I
So
can't wait to
anyway,
get my hands on that.
it's
Oh,
it's pretty cool. It's pretty
what
cool.
a cool book. I would be very proud of that too. That sounds like, yeah, an amazing accomplishment. I cannot
Well,
wait.
I joke that Webster Dictionary next to the word obsession now has a photo of me holding the book. That's how bad this obsession
Oh
is.
my gosh. That's great. Speaking of obsessions, do you remember the first horror movie you ever saw?
Yes. Oh my God. My dad owned movie theaters, and so I started seeing films. The youngest of ages. I had older sisters. When they had to babysit me, they would just take me to the theater, and we'd sit in and watch movies. Well, the first one that I remember, the first horror film, was at my dad's theater in 1961. I was 5 years old, and it was Pit and the Pendulum, starring Vincent Price, and it changed my life. I mean, I fell in love with Vincent Price. I fell in love with horror movies. I fell in love with a pendulum and blade and a torture dungeon. And lo and behold, decades later, I get to direct Elvira's Haunted Hills, which is a spoof of Pit and the Pendulum and the other Vincent Price, Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies. And we got to recreate the Pit and the Pendulum.
Yeah.
And I mean, oh my God, could there have been a better film for me to direct? It was just, I mean, it was incredible. But that was the movie that completely changed my life. And I actually became really good friends with Vincent Price years later.
That's
And
awesome.
I mean, really good friends. You'll read in my other book, it almost became intimate. Um, but anyway, um, Cassandra Peterson, who of course is Elvira,
Mhm.
had a similar situation where her first horror film she remembers seeing as a kid was House on Haunted Hill with
Mhm.
Vincent Price when she was very young. And it had the same sort of seminal effect on her. We both became friends independently of Vincent Price as we got older. And when it came time to do Elvira Sam, we both were just on the same page. And we dedicated the film to him. And he had already passed away by then, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, I mean, we both just share this incredible passion for Vincent Price. And the way actually, I mean, I'm maybe jumping ahead, but I always tell this story. The way I got the job directing Elvira's Haunted Hills, and the way that Vincent Price, the way Vincent Price actually got to know me and remembered me was that I had memorized the monologue that he gives at the end, at the climax of Pit and the Pendulum. And I had learned this in junior high school. And when I met Vincent Price as a kid, when I was like 14, I recited it for him and he couldn't believe it. And he remembered me because of that. And we became friends kind of because of that. It was really learning that monologue. And I did it for him. Well, then flash forward decades later, Cassandra Peterson has me over to her house and we had already become friends. She played a cameo role in one of my movies, not as Elvira, but as a bouncer at a country western bar. But at any rate, she asked me over to talk to me about potentially directing Elvira's Haunted Hills. And she hands me the script and she goes, "Now, this is a spoof of the Vincent Price Edgar Allan Poe movies. Are you familiar with those?" And I go, Vincent Price's monologue, climax of Pit and the Pendulum. "Do you know where you are" by Ptolemy. "You are about to enter hell, hell, the netherworld, the infernal region, the abode of the damned, a place of torment, Gehenna, Naraka, the pit, and the pendulum, the razor edge of destiny. Thus the condition of man, bound on an island from which you can never or hope to escape, surrounded by the waiting pit of hell, which must destroy him finally." Well, she cocked her head and looked at me like I was totally bonkers and said, "You're hired."
Oh my gosh.
And literally it got me the job. And it was the catalyst that really allowed me to become memorable and friends with Vincent Price. And
That's awesome.
so yeah, that monologue and the movie Pit and the Pendulum, I mean, it's so important to me in so many ways, as you could tell. It was incredible.
Ah,
The other film that changed my life back in those days, and I'm
mm.
not sure how old I was when I saw it. It might have been even before Pit and the Pendulum, was Bride of Frankenstein, which I saw on
Oh.
Shock Theater on
Mm.
television. And we had locally in Asheville, North Carolina, where I grew up, our Shock Theater was on Saturday afternoons, right after Dick Clark's American Bandstand. And I never missed a horror film every week. I was just riveted. And Shock Theater had that package, that syndicated package that Screen Gems put together of a lot of old Universal movies and all the classics. And I watched those every week. But Bride of Frankenstein, again, just spoke to me in ways that I wouldn't fully understand and grasp until I was much older. But as a developing gay kid,
Mm.
there was a lot of gay subjects in that movie, including Dr. Pretorius, who is one of the first, I mean, basically gay characters in the mainstream cinema. I
Mm.
mean, he is an amazing character, and he's even introduced by Minnie, the housekeeper played by Una O'Connor. She comes into Dr. Frank and says, "There's a very queer gentleman here to see you." And in walks this effeminate, Ernest Thesiger as Dr. Pretorius, and then he takes him to show him his little miniature people that he's created in these little jars. And oh my God, he's the most eccentric, bizarro character. Well, in Frankenstein: The True Story, hello, they base the James Mason character, Dr. Polidori, on Dr. Pretorius. In fact, in the early drafts
Oh.
of their screenplay, he was
Mm.
called Dr. Pretorius, and he's the one that gets Dr. Frankenstein to create a female
Oh.
bride for the creature and all this stuff. And so anyway, once you realize that, you're like, oh my God, how did I not even recognize that? Of course, it's Dr. Pretorius. And by the way, Guillermo del Toro's movie his Frankenstein happens to have Christoph Waltz playing a character named Dr. Pretorius.
Ooh.
So for anybody who thinks it's being faithful to the Mary Shelley book,
Mhm.
Not so much. It's going to be more faithful to Bride of Frankenstein because Dr. Pretorius is unique to that film. And I wanted to mention, sorry,
Hmm?
just going back, Frankenstein the True Story was not the title that the authors wanted or the producer wanted or anything. It was a title that NBC slapped on this at the very last second.
Mm.
They shot it under the title Dr. Frankenstein. Frankenstein the True Story is just the weirdest, most bogus title because, first of all, it's not a true story,
Mhm.
and it is definitely not true to the Mary Shelley book. It doesn't follow the book at all. It's
Oh.
much more allegiance to James Whale and the first two Frankenstein films, and its own inventions. I mean, it couldn't be more different than the book. So unfortunately, it's been saddled with this misleading title forever, which means that every single review that's ever been written spends the first paragraph talking about how it's
Right.
not faithful to the book and blah 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 blah. Well, no Hammer Frankenstein film ever had to be saddled with that. Nobody expected it to be based on the book,
Mhm.
so it's just it drives me absolutely nuts. Um, and when reviews are tiny, like 2 lines
Right.
in a little TV listing,
Mhm.
it's that takes up all the space, and so it just really annoys me. So
Oof.
ignore the title, folks,
Mhm.
and look at it on its own merits.
That's so funny. It reminds me, my friend showed me a video. There's a movie that came out, an animated film, came out, I think last year, and it's called Pinocchio, A True Story.
Oh God.
Pinocchio's not a true story, but it's hilarious. It's like the weirdest, and it's like such wonky animation too. I don't even know how that came to life. But so
Not
we,
this is not Guillermo del Toro's
right, no, no, oh, that
Pinocchio,
one's
which won the
incredible. That
Oscar
one,
last year for best
right,
animated
right. This is
film.
like a weird, like knockoff. I don't even know where you would find it. But
That's so weird.
Elvira's Haunted Hills, I happen to have it on Blu-ray, which it came out
Ah,
on Blu-ray like 2 years ago now, I think.
yes, yes.
Time
And I
is
was
just,
very much a big part of that. And I co-directed and co-wrote a new
just so
introduction, a little
gorgeous.
5-minute introduction of her in drag as Elvira,
Hmm.
introducing the movie. One of the last times you're going to see her in drag as Elvira. She's pretty much retired that. I mean, I think if somebody offered her enough money, I think she'd get back into that. But she ain't doing it for peanuts, folks. Uh, but I'm just so proud of it, and the restoration is
It
gorgeous,
is
and
so good.
we put in all the extras from all the different versions that
Hmm.
it, that it had, so it's just loaded with all kinds of cool extras, and yeah, I'm just really proud of it. And even the slip cover, well, it comes in a slip
Right.
case,
Yeah. Mine's in the
and then
slipcase right
pull
now.
it out, and
Hmm.
and in regular cover, it has a reversible cover. You can
Yeah.
use whichever one you want. It has the original artwork from the original release poster, which I designed, and it has the pendulum blade and everything. And it
That's
was
such an
just, and
iconic image.
I based that on, obviously, on the original Pit and the Pendulum posters as an homage to those. And Cassandra was good friends with Olivia de Berardinis, who is the most incredible, famous cheesecake artist who always does all those amazing Betty Page paintings and everything. And we begged her if she would do the illustration and the painting of this, and she did. And oh my God, it is
Oh,
just to die for. So
it's
I'm really glad that
gorgeous.
that's part of the packaging.
Mhm. Some of the bonus features on here. So it's a new restoration from a 4K scan. There's the introduction, which you were talking about. There's audio commentary with both Cassandra. There's let's see, Mary Jo Smith. You have some
And
audio
Mary Jo, of course,
commentary.
was Zuzu, and Scott Atkinson, who plays Dr.
Mhm.
Bradley. Bradley is part of that. I'm on there.
There's
Um,
a making
and
of
oh, and Mary
featurette.
Mary
Right.
Shear, who's Lady
Yes.
Helper.
Outtakes, the photo gallery. It's just such a great addition for physical media collectors
Yeah.
to be able to get your hands on this. I'm obsessed with it. It's one of my favorite physical media items that I have. But did you have a favorite scene that you guys filmed when you were making this movie?
Oh my God, that's an impossible
I
question because
know, I
I
know.
I had I had more. I've directed 50 TV and movies projects in my career, and produced 20 more, including, I was one of the producers on Gods and Monsters and everything. But Elvira's Haunted Hills is the pinnacle. I mean, I had so much fun making that movie for all the reasons I've stated already, but just I'm such good friends with Cassandra.
Mhm.
We feel like we were separated at birth. I used to be a redhead like her, and we have blue eyes, and we were Vincent Price nuts, and all this stuff. But we practically complete each other's sentences, and we're always finding things that we absolutely adore and maybe didn't realize it. Like last year, Ryuichi Sakamoto, a Japanese composer who did the score to Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, died. And I just I just texted Cassandra and I said, I don't know if you know who this guy is, but I've always loved the theme to Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. And I sent her a little YouTube, link, and she writes back and she goes, oh my God, that is my favorite thing. I've always had it on my playlist. And I'm a total fan of that as well. And we had no idea that we had, just yet one more totally random thing that we're obsessed with. And then when we were shooting Elvira's Haunted Hills, actually, we had both independently, before we went over to Romania, we had bought the Joni Mitchell's new album at that time, which was it was this beautiful orchestral arrangements of different songs, some of which Joni had written many years earlier, um, and like A Case of You and Both Sides Now. Well, both of us were obsessed with this album. And Cassandra does her own makeup and hair. And every day in the dressing room, at the beginning of the day, she would be playing this album to help her be calm and zen out. And I would come in there and we would just listen to Joni and just like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful album. And the one song, Both Sides Now, that always brings us to tears, just little things like that. I love this woman like you wouldn't believe. So for those reasons, just in so many personal ways, there were so many great memories. It also starred um, Richard O'Brien of Rocky Horror Picture Show. I mean, he played Riff Raff, but a lot of people don't realize he wrote Rocky Horror. He wrote the play, he wrote the music, the lyrics, the libretto, and when it was made into a film, the screenplay. I mean, he is Mr. Rocky Horror. And he also was a huge fan of Vincent Price, understood exactly what we were spoofing. And so it was, and I was always a huge fan of Rocky Horror Picture Show. For, everybody loves Rocky Horror Picture Show, but for people who are in the LGBTQ plus community, especially back then, trying to figure things out and seeing that film was just a fucking liberation. Oh my God. So yeah, I was like totally starstruck when I met him and felt so privileged to have him on the film. And for him to be playing the Vincent Price character and the spooky house and everything, that was incredible. And then having Mary Shear from Mad TV and Mary Jo Smith, who had been in the Austin Powers movie, and just all and then my dear, dear, dear friend Scott Atkinson, who played Dr. Bradley Bradley. I got to tell you a story about that. So we were looking for someone to play Dr. Bradley, and I said to Cassandra, let me bring in a friend of mine, Scott Atkinson, who I'd always wanted to use. I'd actually met him when he auditioned for my film Oblivion. And he was auditioning for the role of Sweeney, which ended up being played by Maxwell Caulfield in the second film. And the reason we ended up going to Maxwell, who was fantastic and did a brilliant job, was that they wanted, a little bit of a name, and Scott was unknown at the time, and but I always thought, God, Scott did such a great reading for that. I want to work with him someday, and so I brought him in to read for Cassandra, and he read the scene, and it was funny, and it was great, and all of that. But I remembered from going to parties with Scott that he did this dead-on impression of George Sanders, who was, had this very posh British accent and was in All About Eve, and he was in the jungle, in the Disney's the Jungle Book. He does the snake. He does the voice of the snake, and Anyway, I'd heard Scott do this impression, and I said to Scott, I said, Scott, try just try to do reading the scene again, but do your George Sanders voice. He did that, and Cassandra and I fell off our chairs.
Oh,
We were laughing so hard. And so we just embraced that idea that he was going to play it as George Sanders. And then at the end, when it's revealed that he's a charlatan and he's actually this cockney, low class guy,
mhm.
I had also heard Scott at parties do Dick Van Dyke,
Oh my
Mary
gosh.
Poppins. And so I said, you got to do your Dick Van Dyke
That's great.
accent. And he did. So I mean that whole character just came to life with Scott's ability to do
Mhm.
these crazy accents. And I loved Scott so much. And
Oh,
unfortunately, he passed away in
mhm.
2020. It was the same year that John Paragon also passed
Yeah.
away, who co-wrote Elvira's Haunted Hills and played. He was Jambi the genie
Mhm.
from Pee-wee's Playhouse, and he was always he was part of the Groundlings, which
Yeah.
Cassandra and Pee Wee Herman or Paul Rubens and everybody started out as, and he was a writing partner with Paul Rubens on his projects and a writing partner with Cassandra on her projects, and so it was just a terrible 1-2 gut punch to lose both of them so close together in
Mhm.
2020. So it's really sad. But Scott will live on forever in our
Yeah,
movie. And
that's
he is in
true.
the extras with these great, interviews in the extras and the audio commentary. So, we've immortalized him as best we could. And
Mhm.
but anyway, yeah, it was. I mean, to go back to your original question, it was just dream come true project, and I loved everything. But you asked the favorite scene. Okay, favorite scene. Well, there's a favorite moment that comes to mind, and that is in the musical number
Uh-huh.
at the very end, because Cassandra bends over and throws up her little skirt,
Mhm.
and she was going to be wearing these red panties, and that was going to be the end of the number, and just sort of vaudeville burlesque sort of number, and the three of them were just going to bend over, and she was going to have these red panties, and haha. Well, I felt like it just needed something else. It needed a stronger button, and we were all scratching our heads like, well, what can we do? What can we
Mhm.
do? And then I suddenly said, what if we put the word applause on those red panties? And Cassandra burst out laughing, and her choreographer, uh, oh Jesus, oh gosh, I'm drawing a total blank. Jerry Jackson. Thank God. Okay, I lost it. Jerry Jackson, who had he was a huge choreographer in Vegas who had worked with Cassandra when she was a showgirl back in the 70s, long before Elvira. That's how much history they have. And by the way, you'll see him in the movie. He plays the gentleman at the very, very end who picks them up at the coach, and he's the gentleman who takes them in the coach on the very end scene. Dr. Bradley picks them up earlier, obviously, but it's Jerry Jackson, the choreographer. He was there. We needed somebody who spoke English to play that role, and he jumped in and did it. We replaced his voice, however, with a guy doing a Terry Thomas impression. But anyway, but Jerry was there
Mhm.
rehearsing this number on set, and he thought the applause thing was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. And he said, "Go take off those panties quick." And she goes behind the screen, takes the panties off, and he takes them and runs to the wardrobe department. And we go back and are shooting other bits
Mhm.
of the scene where you don't see the panties and everything. And he comes running back about 45 minutes later, and he's got them, and we're like, yes. And so we shot it, and it always gets a huge laugh, and we
Yeah.
use that applause moment
Mhm.
at the end of the film when we do the little montage of the characters and everything, and it's a little nice button at the end of the
Oh.
film too.
Mhm.
Okay, well, flash forward to I guess it was 2021. Cassandra decides to auction off her archives. She's been spending all this money having storage units that everything's collecting dust. She said, "I'm done. I'm getting rid of everything." And so she sold all her stuff at Julian's auction house in Beverly Hills. And she put these panties up for auction, and they had it
Uh-huh.
in the auction house, in the showroom, on a mannequin and everything. And I went there for the little party and everything. And Cassandra and I took pictures of us on standing on either side of these little all applause panties. Well, I wanted the goddamn things. I was like, Cassandra, I want these. And she said, well, you're just going to have to bid like everyone else.
Ooh.
And so in the catalog, it was estimated at 300 to 500. Okay, well, I put a maximum of $1,000, and I just, okay, it was my favorite thing in film.
Mhm.
I'm willing to just shell out ridiculous money just to have it. The fucking things went for $6,000,
Ooh, that is
which I did
crazy.
not, which I
Yeah.
did not spring for. Um, but anyway, so somebody out there has those
Yeah.
paintings, and
I,
I'm
I
very
ended up actually
jealous.
getting to stop by the auction house and get to see the gallery, and I got some pictures with all the different costumes and her Santa
Yes,
outfit. That was such a cool exhibit to see everything up close and in person.
wasn't it? It was so to die for, and I
Hmm.
ended up with nothing there because
Yeah.
everything went more way
I know. I was
over.
like, let me find like the teeniest, tiniest thing and
I
everything.
know.
But it was just incredible once in a lifetime to be in the same room with all this history. It was so cool to see it all.
It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. But yeah, that's a fun moment, and of course the pendulum
Mhm.
business has
That's so
has
fun.
meaning.
All right, Sam. So we talked about what some of your favorite parts of filming Elvira's Haunted Hills were, but what was the most difficult part about getting this film made?
Well, we you know we didn't have all the money in the world. It was made for about $1 million, and um, the first Elvira film by comparison was $10 million. So we had a tenth of that. And I happen to think that ours looks more expensive. But anyway, I'm a little partial. But yeah, we Cassandra had actually gone to Romania and toured before I was even involved, and toured all the castles and everything, looking for a potential location. And when I came on board, I was like, listen, I've made films in Romania before. I did the two Oblivion films, and I on days off I would go and visit all these castles. They all claim to be Castle Dracula. If Vlad Tepes had gone there for lunch, it's suddenly yeah, it's
Yeah.
Castle. Um, but I had gone to a bunch of them, and they were either museums with
Mhm.
velvet ropes and all kinds of, delicate antiques everywhere, and jillions of people paying customers to come in. So you weren't going to be able to shoot there. First of all, they're not going to shut it down for you.
Mhm.
And then everything is priceless. You're not going to be able to touch anything. And it just, it wasn't conducive for filming at all. And then the other ones were completely ramshackle with
Oof.
no running water, no heat, no anything, with just leaky ceilings and just really icky. And it wasn't going to be they're up at the top of mountains, hard to get to, with dirt roads that have been washed out in the last
Oh
rain.
no.
Like, no way. It just wasn't gonna work. And I said to Cassandra, I said, Roger Corman in those early ones, um, the House of Usher and Pit and the Pendulum,
Mhm.
and Haunted Palace and those things. He eventually did, like with Tomb of Ligeia, okay, and Mask of the Red Death. He went to England and actually shot on real locations. Fine. But in the ones that we were really spoofing,
Yeah.
were all shot on sound stages in Hollywood,
Mhm.
and establishing shots were matte paintings, and there were no real castles. And I said, we need to embrace that idea. And the beauty of, and then she said, well, we don't need to go to Romania. And I said, well, yes, we do. The beauty of going to Romania is that it's cheap labor, and we can actually build those interior sets. We can actually afford to do that on our teeny budget.
Mhm.
We did that on the Oblivion films. We built an entire Western town, which, by the way, is still standing to this day.
Wow, that's awesome.
You probably heard that Cassandra and I, last year in May of
Hmm.
23 took a group of 30 Elvira superfans on a tour in
Yeah.
Romania.
That was actually
Where,
my next question. How
yeah,
was that revisiting it all these years later?
incredible. But we'll come back to that in 1 second.
Okay.
Great. I convinced her that we had to go to Romania to be able to afford to build these sets.
Mhm.
And now we could control, we could, I talked to the production designer who I had worked with on the Oblivion films, and I said, watch the Roger Corman films.
Mhm.
We want to do an homage to this. When we're building the Pit and the Pendulum set, I want the pendulum and all of it to look like that. And I want, and when and there's a particular staircase in the dungeon in the haunted palace. It's even on the poster, and it's wooden, but it's sort of built like scaffolding, and it comes down. And I said, I want that staircase in the castle. I want this kind of rock, solid staircase with no banister and and all this stuff. So it was all custom built. And I told him, I said, okay, in Roger Corman's Pit and the Pendulum, when he built the Pit and the Pendulum, he only built the walls up to a certain height, and he had the slab, and the pendulum was of course working and stuff. But when in the big wide shots, all of the rest of the set was a painting, was filled out with these beautiful matte paintings that melded into the actual, the realistic set and the actors and everything. And Radu Korcheva is the gentleman's name who was our production designer, and he said, "Well, we have some great old time matte painters here in Romania who were doing this sort of thing in all the classic films that we used to do." And I said, "Great, let's do it that way. Well, it'll be a total homage." So I'm communicating to him all of this over the phone, long before we got there. So then when we finally get there, Radu says, "Well, I've got good news and bad news. What do you want to hear first?" And I said, "Well, give me the bad news." And he says, "Well, all of those great matte painters have all died. So we're not going to be able to do that." And I'm like, "Oh no. So what are we going to do?" And he said, "Well, come with me." And he takes me into the soundstage
Mhm.
where they've been building the Pit and the Pendulum set, and it's the full freaking thing all the way up to the ceiling
Wow.
and high. You can't even believe it. And they've painted Hieronymus Bosch murals on the walls and all this incredible stuff. And I just broke into tears. It was beyond my wildest
Oh,
dream.
that's incredible.
Staircase coming into this Pit and the Pendulum set was this sort of rock staircase with no banister. And I thought, oh no, he's gotten it confused. That was the kind of staircase I want in the living room. And I'm thinking to myself, oh no. And I said, did what about that scaffolding, wooden? And he goes, oh yeah, I didn't forget that. Come with me. He takes me to another soundstage where they've built another dungeon with those stairs,
Oh my gosh.
the waterways and bridges and all this stuff. And this is where the rack is,
Oh,
where Sandra's on this little island between all these waterways. And I mean, I couldn't believe it because I thought on our tiny budget we'd have one little dungeon set and we'd have to rearrange things, or okay, when you look in this corner, it's going to be this, and you turn the camera around and this corner that. No, we had two complete dungeons, and I was just blown away. And then he takes me to the interior of the castle, and there is the staircase exactly as I wanted. I'd actually drawn a sketch of it, and it looks exactly like it. And the big crack all the way across the room, and the way that the whole castle comes apart at the end, and I mean, oh my God, it was incredible. So yeah, we built all those sets from the ground up, made to order, and then some, and it was absolutely amazing. And so that was, convincing Cassandra to do that was, a turning point, I think, for that allowed the look of the film to be what it is today. And I'm just really happy that we went in that direction. If we had tried to shoot in real castles, it would have had a completely different feel. We would have been able to, but we'd been limited as to what we could have done. it wouldn't have matched any of the Corman stuff.
Mm.
It, um, trying to transport furnishings or or customize things or whatever, it wouldn't have been nearly as interesting for us. And the sound, it would have been very echoey, and we would have had sound problems, and everybody be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I can't even fathom how it would be. And everybody be exhausted from it, just getting to and from them every
Mhm.
day from, it just would have, everything would have been different. So, yeah, that was, it really worked out. Blessing in disguise that Cassandra did not get those original castles that she was scouting.
Ugh. But yeah, so we were just briefly mentioning how you revisited with the group of about 30 people. How was it to be back in Romania all these years later? What was that whole trip like?
It was incredible. First of all, the director of photography on our film is a guy named Viorel Sergovici,
Mhm.
sweet guy in the entire world, an amazing cinematographer, as you can see from the film. And he comes from a family of cinematographers. His dad and grandfather were cinematographers in Romania. And now, 20 some odd years later, he is one of the heads of the studio where we shot the film, Bufta Studios outside of Bucharest. And so we were able to get from him the VIP tour for our whole tour group to go visit, to see all the sound stages and to see the back lot and everything. Now, none of the Elvira sets still exist. I mean, this is the magic of movies, and most of the stuff just gets torn down and uh and that's it. But what we did get to see is that Tim Burton's Wednesday is shooting at that studio. And we got to see all of the Tim Burton sets for Wednesday, which was pretty freaking amazing and
That's
incredible.
awesome.
And so we visited all of that, and we went to the wardrobe, department, and we did find a couple of things. We found some of the coats of armor that were decorating our castle and stuff. We found some of those, and we
Oh.
were comparing pictures and going, "Yep, that's the exact one." And there were little things like that we found, which was pretty freaking cool. And then we went to Transylvania, where the um, the entrance way to the castle, the gates, and the coach goes through the gates and drives up, and they get out and go to the front door. All of that, you'll notice that you never see a wide shot of the
Right.
whole castle unless it's the fake model or whatever from a great distance. But for those tighter shots of just going through the gates and the door and all of that, that was actually shot at a historic church in
Oh.
Pennsylvania. And I mean, so if you showed the whole thing, there'd be a steeple and everything, and it looks like a church. But if you just go up, part of the way up the wall and everything, it looks like a castle. And it's from the 15th century or something. I mean, it's incredible. And so we went up there, and the gates, it's like it was untouched. It was like was when we were there 20 some odd years ago. And we all took pictures and everything. We were comparing it to pictures from the film, and it was the coolest thing. And if you recall, there's a scene at night where Elvira sneaks out to go to the stable to find Adrian, the stable stud. She's sneaking out and making all this noise, and she's her foot goes into a bucket, and she gets whacked by a rake that she steps on, and then she knocks over a little statue of this woman, and she gets up on the ped when she senses that she's roused Lady Elizabeth. She gets up on the pedestal and poses and as the statue, while Lady Elizabeth is pulling back the curtain to look out and going, "What is that noise?" Well, that window, we had to actually have Mary Shear, be looking out the window at this real location. Well, inside, it's a church, and the window is way up here. So she had to be on a ladder
Oh
to
my gosh.
go, and she was afraid of heights. I mean, that was a whole thing to get that to work. And But I took everybody in and we, showed them, yeah, it's the interior of a church. And that's where, Mary Shearer was up on a ladder looking out that window. And it was so cool to just be able to revisit all of that. And then just a hop, skip, and a jump from there, literally, 3-minute walk was these little buildings where we created that exterior of the marketplace, where at the very beginning of the film, when Elvira and Zuzu wake up with the landlord wanting his money, and he breaks into the door with an axe, like Jack Nicholson in The Shining, and comes in, sticks his head through the hole, and goes, "Here's Johann," and they go running out the window, and they end up in this marketplace with geese and sausages and all this stuff in this little farmers market sort of thing, and go running through there and off into the distance. Well, that whole row of that building that the marketplace was built in front of, and the window that they come out and everything, is still there. And again, completely untouched since the day we left. I mean, exactly. Now, the market and the vegetables and all that stuff, we brought in and dressed it. So it's just an empty alley.
That's
but
crazy.
but everybody was just like amazed that it was totally that's it.
Mhm.
That is. And then when
Wow.
they go running up the hill, and it's where they meet the coach comes up that Dr. Bradley gets out
Mm.
of, and it's a ride to the castle. Well, that's actually right there. I mean, it is literally just right up the hill. So we walked up there. That same little fork in the road is all still there. It's not. It's completely unchanged. And so it was really cool to see all of that. And then while we were on the way to Transylvania, I found out that we were actually going to be passing by the other major studio in outside of Bucharest called Castel Films, where I shot Oblivion 1 and 2. It was a different studio. Um, and when we shot Oblivion in 1993 or whenever it was, we built this entire Western town from scratch, and there was nothing there but a cornfield and woods. And we leveled the cornfield, and we created lumber by cutting trees down from these woods. That's how primitive it was. And the workers were, creating the lumber. There were some workers that didn't even have hammers. They used rocks to nail in nails. And that's how primitive it
Oh my
was.
gosh.
Well, lo and behold, fast forward now, and this is, 30 years later,
Mhm.
that Western town is still standing, and an entire professional studio has grown up around it. There's an
Oh.
entire backlot of other backlot sets around
Mhm.
it. And there's like 6 giant, huge state of the art sound stages. And they make all kinds of major movies there. And they use that Western town all the time. It was
Oh
it
my
was
gosh.
I noticed it and recognized it was in the Kevin Costner series, The Hatfields and the McCoys.
Oh, okay.
But it's used all the time. And I went, and so the other thing is that the people who were starting this studio way back then, it's a married couple, Vlad and Juana, um, and um, they're still there. They still run it. We all were crying with this big reunion.
Oh.
The guy who was a production assistant on Oblivion is now their top executive
Oh.
managing CEO, and we were crying, this huge thing. And it was so much fun for the people on the tour to see this as well, many of whom had seen my films Oblivion and everything. And um, so all it was just the most amazing trip. It was fantastic. And Cassandra loved, you know, seeing all this stuff again. And we screened Elvira's Haunted Hills in a little meeting room at the hotel, and with all of these super fans.
Mhm.
And it was she Cassandra always she feels that, how shall I put this delicately? She feels that people like her first film better. And
Mhm.
I keep telling her the reason that that more people bring it up and talk about your first film is that more people have seen your first film.
Yeah, I think that's what it is too.
When it aired on NBC in 1992 or 3 or whenever,
Mhm.
10 million people tuned in. 10 million people. And it's also, it was made 10 years or more before Elvira's Haunted Hill. So it's had that many more years to develop a cult following and for people to memorize lines and everything else. Our film got no distribution at the beginning. We played it, at festivals and a few midnight shows. But other than that, it ended up going direct to video. The video company didn't promote it. It didn't do all that well. So I don't, 10, it's just like the budget. The first one cost 10 million, ours cost a million.
Mhm.
That one had an audience of 10 million one night on NBC. I don't think ours has ever even had a million people see it.
Oh no,
So
but the people who have seen it love
the
it.
people in it, I think, generally really like it. And
Mhm.
I just think I mean, I'm partial, but I just love our film. And so whenever there's an opportunity for a screening, I'm always excited because Cassandra is always amazed at how much people love it and how much they laugh. And
Mhm.
oh my God, these 30 super fans watching the movie again, they know it by heart,
Mhm.
were laughing up a storm. And she was just giddy. She was just absolutely loving
Oh.
it. And it actually turned into later last summer. I was being honored at the Queer Screams Film Festival in Portland, Oregon, which just by wild coincidence and totally coincidental is the city that Cassandra now lives in permanently.
Oh.
And I, didn't want to, I don't like to ask too many favors of her, and I
Mhm.
just was like, I want to come up and visit you. I want to see your house, and I stayed with her for a few days as friends, but I didn't want to get her involved in any obligations or make her feel like she was obligated to do anything with the festival. Well, of course, they didn't even know that she lived there because she just moved there recently. And so they wanted to show Elvira's Haunted Hills, not even knowing that she lived there. And I'm like, well, I think I can. I'll ask Cassandra if I can show it because she owns the rights, and I did, and she said yes. So anyway, so as it's getting closer, Cassandra says, "Now they're showing the film, and you're going to be up here, and um, maybe we should introduce it and could we do the screening as for charity? Could we do it for an LGBTQ, a local LGBTQ charity?" And I said, "Oh my God, yes, that would be a fantastic idea."
That's
Well,
perfect.
completely sold out, 300 seats, and she and I came and introduced it, and the audience was just agog.
Oh.
But again, it was a situation where Cassandra was getting to see the film with 300 people who were absolutely adoring it.
Mhm.
And and she came out of there on a high and was like, "Oh my God, it's so great to see people loving this film so much." And I'm like, "Yeah, people like the film.
It's so good.
See it." And so anyway, it's yeah, I was really thrilled. I mean, it was just so much fun last year between the tour and that with the film. It was great.
Oh, that's great. So speaking of the LGBTQ community, spoiler alert, we are both gay men. Uh,
I never would have guessed. Taylor, you've
I
come
know,
out. What?
shocker. I have always found my whole life that the horror community specifically has been very welcoming, open arms to our community. Was it like that when you first began working in the horror community, or is that something that you've noticed has changed over time?
I think it has changed over time. When I was growing up in the dark ages, way before social media, it was before home video. I mean, I was so lucky that I had a dad who owned movie theaters, so I could see films multiple times if they were running. As soon as they were gone, I mean, how did you see these films? You had to
Mhm.
wait for them to go up on TV if you were lucky, and there were only three TV stations. And sometimes they would be running late at night and I would be past my bedtime or, whatever. I don't know. For us, film freaks, it was hard. It was
Mhm.
tough to be a film fan back then. You really had to dig and wait and have patience. And oh my God, now everybody has it so easy nowadays. Um, but I also think that the gay community back then was very closeted, it wasn't accepted the way it is becoming. I have to be careful because we get very lulled living in Los Angeles and New York and San Francisco and these bigger, more liberal metropolitan areas. There's so many smaller towns across America where the homophobia is still just rampant, and it's really difficult for the lives of our brethren.
Mhm.
But back in those days, I felt like I felt very constrained. I felt even talking about Frankenstein, the true story back in those days, and you'll see it in the coverage that I do in my fanzine. I don't really touch on the gay subtext, and I dance around things, and I just it just these things just weren't discussed. And if they were, then you might be labeled. It might label you, oh, if you're talking about this stuff, then you must be yourself. And it was all those fears. And still being closeted, there were legitimate fears about that. Um, and so I don't think that it was as open and people had fully thought things out back then.
Mhm.
As I got older, and all of us have discovered or embraced the whole outsider theory idea of why it is that we're so drawn to horror. And all of us freaks, whether we're gay, whether we're, goths, or whether we're just geeks, whatever it is, we all share that outsider feeling that we're different than the regular kids. We always liked the bizarre stuff. For me personally, it was the Frankenstein monster that I always identified with. When I saw the original Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, it didn't scare me as much as it made me cry. This poor freak of nature, misunderstood by society. Hello, that's what I was. I felt like I was a freak of nature that was misunderstood by society. And he wasn't killing people because he was a murderer. He was killing people in self-defense. I had bullies that I wanted to kill. um, and in self-defense. I so identified with him, and the way that Dr. Frankenstein abandons him, in the way that so many of our parents abandon us, or friends abandon us once they found out or suspected that we were gay, all of those things were just really deep-seated psychological things that just permeated me, and those films spoke to me
Mhm.
and I didn't even realize how deeply until years later when I put it all together.
Yeah.
And I think that we all share that, and we all have our different, you know, favorites in the horror world and favorite characters that spoke to us and whatnot. But it's that outsider thing of feeling like a freak of nature, feeling different, being misunderstood, and this genre really speaks to that in so many of the characters and films.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it is because of you, it is because of Cassandra, people who have come before me, that I am even able to be honestly as open and as free as I am. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for everything you've done. Thank Cassandra for everything she's done. You guys have laid the groundwork. You guys have made it more accepting, more open minded, and just I cannot thank you guys enough because you guys played such a huge role, especially for me growing up. So just thank you for that because it means the world to me.
Incredibly sweet of you to say, and I'm very touched and moved by that. And many people have said similar things. And it's, you know, when you look at the Elvira character, what an amazing character that is, because
Mhm.
she's goth freak who, you know, marches to the beat of her own drummer no matter what anybody says. She is, you know, that character is not changing. She's who she is, and get used to it. And,
Mhm.
you know, although the character is not technically gay, um, it's something that all of us gay men, especially, we all have our divas that we love. We identify with that so much. We identify with a strong woman who, against all odds and against all criticism and against all everybody giving them shit, they just aren't going to change. They're going to stick to their guns and do their thing. And that's something that's very empowering, and to see it actually in action. And it's certainly on the first Elvira film of that character being a fish out of water in
Yeah.
modern America. It does resonate, and I do agree with Cassandra that there's a certain magic to that. And you know, whereas in our film, you know, she's dropped into a house of crazies and everybody's a freak. um but in Elvira's Haunted Hills, you know, these are the people we run into, even the exaggerated ones like the
Right.
eating character or whatever. We've seen that, we all know that exists out there, and it's scary. um
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I think that the Elvira character has been inspirational to everyone. And what an amazing thing that Cassandra. I was so proud of her for coming out in her
Mhm.
memoir that she's part of the LGBTQ plus community, and of course I had known it for the 20 years that she's been with her girlfriend T. But it was, you know, it was one of those things where she was afraid that it would hurt her career for a long time. She didn't know, you know, her she just didn't know how it was going to affect
Right.
things. And she wanted to come out, and she actually was going to come out several times,
Mhm.
but just didn't work out. There was going to be a reality show for a while that was going to be produced by World of Wonder, the company that
Oh.
does all stuff. And they were going to make it this big reveal in that series, but then it didn't get picked up. They did a pilot and didn't get picked up. You know, so it was just, she didn't want to wait as long as she did, but it just, that's the way it ended up being. And
Yeah.
but I'm so glad that it happened. It happened in such a beautiful way in that memoir that is the best written showbiz memoir ever written. I just absolutely love it. If you haven't read her book, you have to get it.
It's
It was
incredible.
number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list, people. Come on. And you have to get it, the audiobook version, and have her read
Hmm.
to you. It's so amazing. Um, but I'm just really glad about that. And but it just obviously makes perfect sense that she has that sensibility that we all share as a community. And it just, you know, it makes perfect sense. And also she's the original drag queen, darling.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I tell people all the time, if it was not for Elvira, I don't think I ever would have come out. I think that's 100% true to this day. So,
Wow.
Sam, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for joining me today. It means the world to me. Like, this is uh, honestly like one of the highlights of my career, getting to do this interview with you. It means the world to me. For people who are interested in keeping up with you and your upcoming projects and finding out more about your book, where can people follow you?
I'm on Facebook. I'm a little old school. Facebook is my favorite because, as you can tell, I'm a little long-winded, and sometimes I still tell long stories. And Facebook doesn't have a limit on how much text you can have in a post. So if you really want the full thing, find me on Facebook. I am on Instagram, but Instagram has a limit. So I always, whatever I repost on Instagram is an edited version of what I do on Facebook. But find me on Facebook. I'm Sam Irvin. If you're only on Instagram, I'm lowercase, all lowercase, Sam underscore Irvin underscore director. And Irvin is spelled Irvin. I just want to plug one other thing. I have another book that came out the year before,
Ooh.
uh, 20, what is it, 2022. It's a coming of age memoir. It's also a collection of 35 interviews that I did with horror royalty for my fanzine back in the days when I was a teenager and going to England, like I mentioned. And it is called dun, 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 I Was a Teenage Monster Hunter: How I Met Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and more. And it has a forward by Cassandra Peterson. and it's also a huge book. It's a 400 color pages with a million photos, and it's available on Amazon in paperback, hardback, e ebook. And last year we did an audiobook of this with Cassandra reading her forward and a lot of other guest star voices of doing the recreating the interview answers, like Jane Seymour and Stephanie Beacham and a whole bunch of cool people. So it's a really fun book, and I highly recommend getting both, where we can all read it to you, but you can also see all the pictures. And I love this with Cassandra's forward. The cartoonist who did the cover, Dan Gallagher, he did this amazing cartoon of me on the slab and about to be sliced by the pendulum by Elvira. So
That's incredible. That is so cool.
anyway, it's also a heartfelt labor of love kind of book, and so anyway, check it out.
Yeah, I will put links in the description of this video to your Instagram, to the Amazon links to buy all these books. Thank you so much. You know, we actually discovered we live pretty close to each other. So
Yes,
maybe someday we'll do a part 2 in person and we'll have some wine or something while we do it. That'd be so fun.
it'd be great.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. It was very nice to meet you. And I look forward to, first of all, checking out both your books and to seeing you again soon.
Yes, thank you so much, Taylor.
Thank you. Bye.